The laughter echoed across the barracks like sharp glass scraping against her pride. Lena kept her gaze low, fixing it on the scuffed steel floor beneath her boots, trying not to let the sneers of her fellow recruits pierce deeper than they already had. "Fragile little bird," one of them muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Another barked a laugh and added, "Bet she couldn't even hold her rifle steady without shaking." Their voices mixed in a cruel chorus, feeding off each other, their contempt growing with every word. Lena felt the heat crawl up her neck but said nothing. She had learned long ago that speaking only added fuel to their fire. Silence was her shield, though it was a thin one. To them she was a joke, too small, too quiet, too unremarkable to survive in a place that demanded ruthlessness. In the ranks of the Vanguard Battalion, where warriors were forged through blood and endurance, she was a misfit. Yet, what they couldn't see behind her stillness was a storm brewing, a quiet fire that had been tempered by a past none of them could imagine. Every night, she trained longer than the rest, when the others had already collapsed into their bunks. She pushed her body until her arms trembled, until sweat soaked through her uniform and her lungs begged for relief. Memories drove her, the screams of her village when raiders came, the flash of blades, the silence of a family that would never return. Those scars carved discipline into her bones. Where others fought for rank, for pride, for glory, Lena fought for something deeper: survival and the refusal to ever again be powerless. Still, none of them knew. They only saw the girl who avoided their eyes, who seemed brittle under the weight of their cruel banter. They couldn't have been more wrong. The turning point came during a live simulation exercise, one designed to test strategy under fire. The recruits were split into teams, tasked with navigating a mock urban war zone filled with automated turrets and drone patrols. Most laughed when Lena was placed as point scout. "She'll be the first to die," one said, grinning as if it were already certain. They didn't know that Lena's eyes missed nothing. She mapped every alley, every shadow, every movement of the patrol drones. While the others charged with bravado, spraying fire wildly, Lena moved silent as a whisper. Within minutes, 3 of their loudest mockers had been taken out by turret fire they hadn't anticipated, traps Lena had avoided with effortless precision. No one noticed her slip deeper into the war zone, alone, methodical, calculating. By the time the simulation ended, the instructors reviewing the footage were stunned. Where the rest of the squad had blundered into predictable ambushes, Lena had dismantled objectives one after another, completing routes no one had ever attempted solo. When the tally was shown, her kill count on enemy drones and turrets dwarfed the combined efforts of the entire team. The barracks grew quiet that night. No one laughed. But one simulation wasn't enough to change hardened minds. They told themselves it was luck, a fluke, a glitch in the program. The whispers began again, though quieter now, like the fading embers of mockery unwilling to die out. Lena ignored them because she knew reality would soon come knocking. War had a way of shattering illusions. And it did. A month later, orders came down. A real mission, their first deployment beyond the safety of training. Rebel insurgents had fortified a canyon outpost, cutting supply lines and ambushing convoys. The Vanguard recruits were to neutralize the threat. Excitement buzzed through the barracks, bravado swelling again. Lena packed in silence, her expression unreadable, though inside she felt the steady pulse of something colder: readiness. She had been waiting for this. The drop ship rattled through turbulent winds as it descended into the canyon. Dust swirled, the metallic scent of ionized air thick in the hold. Around her, recruits clutched their rifles, some whispering jokes to mask their nerves, others grinning as though this were just another game. Lena sat still, eyes closed, her hands resting steady on her weapon. When the ramp dropped, chaos erupted. Blaster fire tore through the air. The squad scattered, shouts rising, confidence cracking in the face of real bloodshed. The insurgents were no drones, no programmed turrets. They were cunning, ruthless, and merciless. Within minutes, 2 recruits lay dead, their screams cut short. The air reeked of burning ozone and charred earth. Panic took hold. And then, out of the smoke, Lena moved. Where others froze, she advanced, slipping through cover with predator's grace. She saw the battlefield not as chaos but as a map unfolding before her eyes. Every muzzle flash marked an enemy's position. Every echo revealed distance and angle. She did not hesitate. One shot, clean and precise, dropped a rebel sniper pinning down her squad. Another burst took out a machine gunner hidden behind sandbags. The kill count began to climb. Her squad barely realized she was moving, ghosting between rock formations, her rifle spitting death with mechanical precision. Minutes stretched like lifetimes. When the smoke cleared at last, the canyon floor was littered with the fallen. Lena stood, chest rising and falling in calm rhythm, her eyes sharp, unbroken. Around her, the others stared in stunned silence. The mocking voices were gone, replaced by something else: fear, awe, and the chilling realization of just who they had underestimated. The silence after the battle was heavier than the smoke that still hung in the canyon air. No one spoke as they gathered around the drop ship, their boots crunching against the dust and scattered shell casings. Eyes darted toward Lena but quickly looked away, as though staring too long might draw some curse upon them. She didn't flinch beneath their glances. Her hands moved with the same steady precision as before, reloading her rifle, checking each round, adjusting her armor straps. To her, the fight was not an act of glory but survival, a routine necessity in a world that had never given her safety. The others, though, were shaken. They had seen her walk through gunfire as if it bent to her will. They had watched her tally bodies like marks on a ledger, each shot unerring, each movement deliberate. She was no longer their joke. She was something else now, something that unsettled them. The instructors debriefed them that night, their voices clipped and professional, but even they couldn't hide their astonishment. Effective elimination of enemy resistance, one officer read from the report, his tone strained. 72 confirmed kills. Nearly single-handed. The words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Lena sat at the far end of the table, her expression unreadable, while her squad mates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of the loudest mockers from before, a tall recruit named Karsten, couldn't bring himself to look at her. He fiddled with his datapad, his jaw clenched. She noticed, though she gave no outward sign. She had learned that silence was often more powerful than any retort. Over the following weeks, the missions grew harder. The rebels were desperate and cunning, setting ambushes in twisted valleys and laying mines across their routes. Squads that once brimmed with arrogance began losing members to the harsh reality of war. But Lena endured. More than endured, she excelled. In every mission, her kill count rose, her precision uncanny, her instincts unshakable. At first, some whispered theories. Maybe she had cybernetic implants, some secret advantage. Others claimed she had made deals with darkness, that no ordinary human could kill with such calm detachment. But Lena knew the truth was simpler, though far crueler. Pain had sharpened her into a weapon long before she ever held a gun. Where others feared death, she had already lived through worse. Her reputation spread beyond the barracks. Other squads began to take notice. Instructors mentioned her name with a mixture of respect and unease. "Don't underestimate her," one sergeant warned a fresh batch of recruits. "That quiet one? She'll outlive us all." Yet with recognition came distance. Soldiers who once mocked her now kept their distance, as though proximity might make them targets themselves. The mess hall that once rang with jeers fell into hushed tones when she entered. Lena ate alone, her gaze on her food, her ears tuned to whispers she no longer cared to decipher. Respect, she realized, could be as isolating as ridicule. The next mission pushed them further than any before. Their orders were to infiltrate a rebel stronghold carved into the side of a cliff. Intelligence suggested it housed both supplies and a high-ranking commander responsible for coordinating raids across the region. Taking it down would cripple the insurgency's backbone. The squad boarded the dropship with heavy weapons and even heavier nerves. No one spoke much on the ride. Lena sat in silence, her fingers resting against the worn stock of her rifle, her breathing even. Around her, the recruits shifted, their eyes flicking toward her as if drawing strength from her steadiness. She noticed but said nothing. For her, calm wasn't something to display, it was simply the air she lived in. The descent was brutal, winds slamming against the drop ship as they approached the jagged cliffs. When the hatch opened, they rappelled down ropes into the darkness below, their boots hitting rock with hollow thuds. The stronghold loomed ahead, narrow entrances cut into stone, guards patrolling with rifles and searchlights sweeping the canyon floor. Orders crackled through their comms. Silence, precision, infiltration. But before anyone could stumble into reckless action, Lena moved. She pressed herself against the rock wall, her rifle raised, her body melting into shadow. One shot, then another. 2 guards dropped silently, their bodies crumpling before alarms could sound. The squad followed her lead, advancing quietly, their movements clumsy compared to hers but effective enough under her direction. For the first time she wasn't just surviving, she was leading, though no one had formally given her command. Inside the stronghold, chaos erupted. Once the alarms finally blared, the corridors filled with gunfire and shouts. Smoke grenades hissed, vision blurring, chaos swallowing order. But Lena thrived in chaos. She moved through it like a current through water, her shots precise, her blade flashing in close quarters when her rifle emptied. By the time they reached the command chamber, half the squad was wounded, one killed, but Lena stood unscathed, her eyes cold and steady. The rebel commander, a scarred brute of a man, tried to bargain when she leveled her rifle at him. "Wait, we can talk." His words ended in a single shot, clean and merciless. She didn't hesitate. The mission was complete. When the report came in, commander neutralized, stronghold destroyed, over 100 confirmed kills credited to Lena. The camp buzzed with disbelief. The number seemed impossible. The kill count was higher than most seasoned veterans saw in entire campaigns. Her squad, those who had once mocked her, could barely meet her eyes. They knew the truth now. She wasn't the fragile little bird they had laughed at. She was the storm that had saved their lives again and again. Yet instead of celebration, a heavy stillness spread. The others weren't just in awe, they were afraid. Not afraid of losing to her in training, but afraid of what she was becoming. A weapon wrapped in human skin, a reminder of how fragile their bravado truly was. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm of missions, debriefings, and restless nights. Lena hardly spoke, but her silence had grown heavier now, carrying weight that unsettled even her commanding officers. They had seen her efficiency, her precision, her mercilessness on the battlefield, and though they praised her in reports, their eyes betrayed something else whenever they looked at her: hesitation, as if uncertain whether to reward or fear her. For Lena it made little difference. She hadn't joined the vanguard to win medals or gain approval. She had come for the only thing that mattered, to make sure no one could ever strip power away from her again. Still, the whispers never fully died. Some said she was a savant born for killing, others swore she was cursed, a grim omen sent to haunt the living. Whatever the truth, her kill counts grew like a shadow trailing her every step, impossible to ignore. One night, as the squad returned from yet another bloody raid, Karsten, the same recruit who had once mocked her the loudest, sat across from her in the dimly lit mess hall. His face was drawn, pale beneath the harsh overhead lights. He pushed food around his tray without eating. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he broke the silence. "You don't even flinch," he said quietly, his voice carrying something between admiration and fear. "I've seen men scream, break down, freeze in terror. But you, it's like you're not even there. Do you even feel anything?" His words were blunt, but they weren't cruel. They were honest, tinged with something like desperation. Lena met his gaze for a long moment before answering, her voice calm, almost detached. "Feeling doesn't change what needs to be done." That was all she said, but it silenced him more effectively than any rebuke could. The missions escalated, each one bloodier than the last. The rebels, backed into corners, fought with the fury of those who had nothing left to lose. Convoys were ambushed, villages turned into minefields, and every day brought more names to the casualty lists. For most, the war was a crucible that chipped away at their spirit. For Lena, it was simply the battlefield she had always prepared herself for. She adapted, anticipated, outmaneuvered. Her kill count soared, her reputation spread beyond her own battalion. Soldiers from other units spoke her name in hushed voices, stories of her precision carrying like wildfire. Some glorified her, calling her the deadliest marksman of the campaign. Others whispered darker tales, that she had stared down a firing squad and survived, that bullets bent away from her as though unwilling to strike. None of it mattered to Lena. Stories were for those who needed meaning. She only needed survival. Yet survival came with its own cost. The squad around her, once arrogant and dismissive, now looked to her in battle, their eyes begging silently for her guidance even when orders came from elsewhere. They followed her movements, mimicked her strategies, sought her approval without ever daring to ask for it. She noticed the shift, though she neither encouraged nor rejected it. Leadership was never her goal, yet it was thrust upon her in silence, shaped not by rank but by necessity. Those who had mocked her now clung to her shadow. And Lena, for all her detachment, began to feel a strange weight pressing in on her, not of responsibility she had chosen, but of reliance she couldn't ignore. One operation in particular etched itself into memory. They were tasked with intercepting a heavily guarded weapons convoy snaking through a mountain pass. The odds were grim. The rebels had fortified high ground with heavy guns, and the narrow terrain left little room for maneuvering. It was the kind of mission meant to bleed soldiers dry. Fear hung heavy in the dropship as they approached. Even the bravest recruits avoided each other's eyes. But Lena sat still, her gaze fixed forward. When they landed, she took point without hesitation. Bullets rained down from above, explosions rocked the pass, and screams echoed through the chaos. Yet she did not falter. One by one, she eliminated the gunners on the ridges, her shots threading through the storm with impossible accuracy. She climbed, crawled, advanced through fire that should have pinned anyone else. By the time the convoy was destroyed and the high ground cleared, the squad lay battered and bloodied, half of them barely able to stand. But Lena remained unshaken, her rifle still warm in her hands, her kill count once again dwarfing all others combined. Afterward, the officers spoke of commendations, of medals for valor. But among the squad, celebration was muted. They sat in silence, staring at their meals, at the ground, anywhere but at her. Karsten finally voiced what many of them had been thinking. "She's not like us," he muttered, the words low but heavy. "She's something else." No one argued. They all knew it. In battle, she had become untouchable, an unfeeling machine of precision. And though she saved them, though she kept them alive when they might have been slaughtered, the distance between them and her grew wider with every mission. For Lena, the solitude was nothing new. Yet she couldn't deny a subtle shift in her own heart. The faces of those she killed rarely haunted her. She had buried those nightmares long ago. But the faces of those she saved, the recruits who clung to her strength, lingered in her mind in ways she didn't expect. They needed her whether they admitted it or not. And for reasons she didn't fully understand, she found herself unwilling to let them fall. Perhaps it was survival. Perhaps it was something more. But as the war stretched on, Lena realized that her battle was no longer just against the enemy. It was against the very perception of what she was becoming. A savior to some, a monster to others, and to herself, perhaps both at once. The war showed no mercy, and as the months dragged on, neither did the missions. Lena's squad was deployed deeper into enemy territory, farther from supply lines and reinforcements. Their days became a constant rhythm of ambushes, skirmishes, and exhaustion that pressed into their bones. The faces around her changed. Soldiers she had once fought beside were gone, replaced by fresh recruits who stared at her with a mix of awe and dread the moment they learned her name. They didn't laugh like the old ones had. They barely spoke to her at all, as though afraid any word might disturb the force that kept her alive. It was a strange kind of respect, cold, isolating, edged with fear, but it was all Lena had ever known. She told herself it didn't matter. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to fight. But fighting had its cost. Each mission demanded more blood, more bodies. The rebels fought harder, their desperation turning them ruthless. They planted explosives in villages, used civilians as shields, and ambushed patrols with suicidal ferocity. The vanguard soldiers who had once strutted with bravado now carried haunted eyes, their hands trembling when they thought no one noticed. Yet through it all, Lena remained steady. She was the anchor in their storm, the one who didn't waver when everything else crumbled. Her kill counts grew into numbers that seemed unreal. 100, 200, more. Each tally added to the legend whispered behind her back. And with each number, the distance between her and the rest of humanity seemed to stretch further. One evening, after a particularly brutal mission where half their squad had been lost clearing a rebel tunnel system, Karsten approached her in the barracks. His uniform was still stained with blood that wasn't his eyes hollowed by grief. He stood at her bunk, struggling to find words, his throat working as if each syllable cut him. "Why you?" he asked finally, voice raw. "Why do you never fall? Why do the rest of us bleed and die, and you walk through it like you're untouchable?" Lena looked at him, her expression calm but not unkind. For a long moment she said nothing, then replied quietly, "Because I've already died once. Everything after that is survival." Karsten stared at her, not understanding but sensing the truth in her tone. He left without another word. The next mission proved to be their deadliest yet. Intelligence reported a rebel fortress buried deep in the mountains, heavily armed and impossible to bypass. It was more than an outpost, it was a hub for smuggling weapons and coordinating raids. Destroying it would cripple the insurgency in the region, but the price would be steep. As the squad prepared, tension gripped them like a vice. They all knew what this meant. Few would return. Yet as they readied their gear, all eyes drifted to Lena. No one said it aloud, but unspoken hope hung heavy in the air. If anyone could get them through it, it was her. The approach was a nightmare. The path to the fortress wound through narrow ridges exposed to sniper fire, with mines hidden beneath loose gravel. Within minutes of advancing, 2 recruits were gone. One shredded by a hidden explosive, the other dropped by a single shot to the head. Panic rippled through the squad. Chaos threatened to consume them. But Lena surged forward, her movements sharp, her voice finally breaking its silence. "Cover left ridge," she ordered, her tone calm but commanding. They obeyed without hesitation. For the first time she wasn't just guiding silently by example, she was leading outright. She darted ahead, her rifle cutting down snipers one by one, her hand signals directing the others to cover and advance. Step by step, they clawed their way up the ridge, driven not by training manuals or commanding officers, but by the unwavering certainty in her movements. When they reached the fortress walls, the battle erupted into a storm of fire and steel. The rebels poured out, screaming, firing wildly, their numbers overwhelming. The squad fell back into defensive formations, but even then they were outmatched. Explosions shook the earth, screams pierced the air, and for a moment it seemed the mission would collapse into slaughter. But Lena became a force of nature. She vaulted cover, advancing into the hail of bullets with terrifying precision. Every shot she fired landed, every move calculated to break the enemy's defense. The kill count soared, 10, 20, 30, her rifle a relentless executioner. The rebels faltered, their charge slowing as fear spread among them. They had expected soldiers. They hadn't expected her. Hours later, when the fortress finally fell, the ground was soaked in blood. Bodies littered the courtyards, the walls scorched by fire. The squad was broken, half their number dead, the rest wounded, but the fortress was theirs. Lena stood at the center of it. All her chest rising and falling steadily, her rifle still hot from overuse. Around her, the survivors stared in silence, their faces pale, their eyes filled with something more than awe. They had seen her rack up a kill count that defied belief, clearing rooms by herself, taking down entrenched machine guns without missing a step. No one mocked her now. No one dared. The legend had solidified into something real, something terrifying. That night, as they sat around a dim fire in the ruins, Karsten spoke again. His voice was hoarse, his hands shaking as he cleaned his rifle. "They'll tell stories about you," he said, not looking up. "They'll call you a hero, a savior. But when I look at you, I don't see a savior. I see death walking." His words hung heavy, unchallenged. No one disagreed. Even Lena said nothing, her gaze fixed on the flames. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps she was no longer just a soldier, no longer just a girl fighting to survive. Perhaps she had become something else entirely, something that even she wasn't sure she understood. Word of the fortress battle spread faster than the smoke that had choked its mountains. Reports of Lena's kill count reached not only her battalion but the higher command across the entire region. 79 confirmed kills in a single operation, dozens more unconfirmed, a rebel fortress dismantled almost entirely by her precision and will. Commanders debated her name in hushed voices, struggling to classify her. Was she a prodigy, a tactical asset, or something far more dangerous, an anomaly who might one day slip out of their control? While the brass weighed their decisions in polished rooms, the soldiers on the ground had no such questions. To them, Lena had become myth. When she entered the mess hall, silence followed. When her boots echoed through corridors, heads bowed as if before something sacred, or cursed. Respect had fused with fear until they were indistinguishable. Yet Lena herself remained unchanged. She still trained in silence, still moved with the calm efficiency of someone who expected nothing from the world. But the weight pressing on her shoulders grew heavier with every mission. She could see it in the eyes of the recruits who trailed behind her in battle. They weren't looking to their commanding officers anymore. They were looking to her. Every decision she made, every step she took, became their lifeline. She had never asked for it, but leadership had been thrust upon her, silent and relentless. In the rare hours of quiet, she wondered if she was saving them, or merely delaying their inevitable fall. The war was a grinder and no one came out whole. Not even her. Her reputation soon drew the attention of General Rykov himself, the grim, iron-willed commander overseeing the entire campaign. When Lena was summoned to his quarters, the squad whispered like schoolchildren awaiting judgment. She entered the room without hesitation, her posture steady, her expression unreadable. The general studied her in silence for several long moments, his sharp eyes scanning her like one might examine a weapon. Finally he spoke, his voice rough with years of command. "You are effective. Too effective. Men follow you when they should be following their officers. Your kill counts are beyond precedent. Some see you as an asset. Others fear what you represent. Tell me, recruit Lena, what are you?" She met his gaze without flinching. "A soldier," she said simply. He leaned back, unimpressed with the answer yet unable to pierce the calm wall of her presence. After a long pause, he dismissed her. But the question lingered in his eyes long after she had gone. Was she truly a soldier, or something else entirely? The missions that followed tested them further. Lena's squad was sent to the front lines where the war burned hottest. Towns reduced to rubble, civilians fleeing in endless streams, rebels striking with desperate brutality. Each battle seemed to bleed into the next, a blur of fire, blood, and screams. But through it all, Lena's presence remained unbroken. She fought like a shadow of inevitability, her rifle carving through enemies as though fate itself guided her hand. Her kill counts continued to climb, hundreds now, numbers that would have been impossible for anyone else. The soldiers whispered that she wasn't merely fighting battles, she was deciding them. When Lena was present, victory was inevitable. When she wasn't, death swallowed entire squads whole. The contrast deepened her legend, making her not just a soldier but a symbol of survival. Still, legends came with a cost. Lena could feel the distance growing wider. Those who once mocked her no longer dared even to speak casually in her presence. They treated her like an untouchable figure, a ghost that walked among them. In the barracks, no one sat near her. On missions, they followed her commands instinctively, but in campfires afterward, conversations fell silent when she approached. Karsten remained the only one who occasionally broke the wall, though even he spoke rarely. One night, after a brutal clash that left their squad reduced to half strength, he finally asked her, "Do you ever wonder what happens when the war ends? When there's nothing left to kill?" Lena stared at him for a long moment, the firelight flickering across her unreadable face. "Wars don't end," she said softly. "They just change names." Karsten swallowed hard, realizing she wasn't speaking about campaigns or politics. She was speaking about herself. The higher command began using her differently. Where most squads were sent in groups, Lena's was increasingly given surgical assignments. Assassinations, sabotage, impossible raids that required precision no ordinary soldier could deliver. She became less a part of the unit and more a weapon unleashed at decisive moments. Officers spoke to her with a carefulness that bordered on fear, and even her commanding sergeant no longer gave her direct orders. Instead, he handed her objectives and stepped aside, letting her chart the course. On the battlefield this worked. Off the battlefield it isolated her further. She had become indispensable and untouchable. But Lena's growing myth drew attention not just from her own side. The rebels began to whisper of her too. They called her the Silent Death, the Phantom, the Hunter in Shadows. Some squads refused to fight when they heard she was in the area, deserting rather than face her. Others set elaborate traps, baiting battles specifically to lure her in. It was no longer just war, it had become personal. The rebels didn't see her as a soldier. They saw her as a force that had to be extinguished at any cost. And so, as her own command leaned harder on her abilities, the enemy began focusing all their fury on ending her. The breaking point came when intelligence revealed that the rebels had gathered a strike team, dozens of their best fighters, veterans hardened by years of bloodshed, with one objective: hunt Lena, kill her, and break the legend that had frozen even hardened soldiers. The moment the briefing was given, whispers ran through her squad like wildfire. Some were terrified, others resigned, but all knew one thing: if anyone could survive such a trap, it was her. For Lena, the news carried no shock, no fear. She had expected it. Legends always drew challengers. She loaded her rifle in silence, her steady hands betraying nothing. To her it was just another battlefield. To everyone else, it was a reckoning. The night the strike team came for her was cold and moonless, the kind of night where the silence pressed like a weight against the skin. Lena sat cleaning her rifle in the dim glow of a portable lantern while the rest of the squad dozed in uneasy sleep. She felt the shift in the air before she heard anything, a subtle tension threading through the darkness. Her hands stilled on the weapon, her eyes narrowing. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, feet moved softly, too disciplined to belong to wild animals, too coordinated to be anything but soldiers. She had been waiting for this. The rebels had whispered her name too long to let it stand unchallenged. Now they had come to kill the legend they feared. She rose without a sound, sliding the rifle into place, her movements fluid, instinctive. The first shot came seconds later, a sharp crack from the darkness that punched into the dirt near the fire. The squad jolted awake, chaos erupting in their camp. "Ambush!" someone shouted, scrambling for cover. But Lena was already moving. She dove behind a boulder as bullets shredded the air, sparks ricocheting from stone. Dozens of shadows poured over the ridge, masked fighters moving with lethal precision. They weren't ordinary rebels. These were veterans, hunters trained to kill in the blackest hours of war. And they had come for her. The squad scattered, panic threatening to overwhelm them. Explosions ripped through their camp as grenades rained down, flames lighting the canyon in a hellish glow. But Lena was calm, her breathing steady. She could see the battlefield unfold before her like a map. Every muzzle flash, every shifting shadow revealed positions. She fired once, twice. 2 rebels fell before they realized she had marked them. She rolled to new cover, her movements seamless, never lingering long enough to be pinned. Her squad tried to return fire, but they were overwhelmed. Karsten's voice shouted through the chaos, "They're after you." He wasn't wrong. The attackers ignored the others, their firepower focused on the silent figure weaving death between the rocks. Lena knew she couldn't just defend. To survive, she had to break their formation, dismantle the hunters before they closed in. She slipped into the darkness, her boots barely making a sound against the gravel. One rebel stalked past, searching, his weapon raised. Lena emerged behind him like a shadow, her blade flashing once across his throat before she melted back into the black. Another tried to flank her squad. A single shot from her rifle pierced his skull before he could fire. Each kill was precise, calculated, part of a larger rhythm she alone could hear. But there were so many of them, more than any squad should have had to face, and for the first time in months, Lena felt the faint edge of strain pressing against her chest. The battle raged for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. Smoke choked the air, fire painted the canyon walls in shifting orange. Lena moved like water through it all, striking and vanishing, but the rebels pressed harder. Explosions shook the ground, dust raining from the cliffs. A squadmate screamed as shrapnel tore through his side. Another was dragged down in the shadows, his cries cut short. The camp was disintegrating under the assault, but Lena fought on. Her kill count rose higher and higher, each shot another mark against those who had come to erase her. 10, 20, 30. Blood sprayed across the rocks, bodies littered the canyon floor. Still they came. At last, the leader of the strike team revealed himself. A massive man armored in scavenged plating, his rifle modified into a weapon of brutal firepower. He bellowed orders, his voice carrying even over the chaos. "Bring her down. She bleeds like the rest." His men surged at the command, desperation mingling with rage. Lena fixed her gaze on him. She knew instinctively that cutting off the head would collapse the body. With calm precision, she weaved through cover, bullets sparking inches from her. She aimed and fired, but the leader's armor deflected the shot. He turned, spotted her, and unleashed a torrent of fire that shredded the rocks around her. Dust and stone exploded into the air, forcing her back. For the first time she was pinned. But Lena didn't panic. She shifted position, crawling through the dust, counting his shots, listening for the rhythm of his weapon. When the pause came, the brief second it took to reload, she rose from cover like a phantom, sprinting across the chaos. The leader swung his weapon toward her, too slow. Lena fired once, twice, 3 times, the round slamming into the weak points of his armor, under the arm, at the neck, through the visor. He staggered, bellowed, and collapsed into the dirt, his lifeblood soaking into the dust. A hush fell over the battlefield just for an instant. His men froze, the certainty in their eyes shattering. In that moment, Lena struck again, dropping 3 more before they could recover. Panic rippled through the hunters. The predator they had come to kill had turned on them. The fight ended in ruin. Those who survived fled into the night, their discipline shattered, their fear greater than their hatred. The canyon floor was a graveyard, bodies strewn across the rocks, blood pooling in the dirt. The fire from their camp flickered over the devastation, painting it in hellish hues. Lena stood at the center, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, her rifle still warm in her hands. Around her, the surviving squad members stared in silence, too shocked even to speak. She had killed more than 40 men in a single night, dismantling a strike team built to destroy her. Her kill count had become something monstrous, something beyond comprehension. Karsten approached slowly, his face pale, his eyes wide with something close to terror. He looked at the battlefield, then at her, his voice trembling. "You're not human," he whispered. It wasn't meant as an insult. It was the only explanation he could find. Lena said nothing, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to answer. The silence was enough. And as dawn broke over the blood-soaked canyon, one truth settled into every soldier's heart. The rebels had failed to kill the legend. But in surviving, Lena had become something else entirely, something more than a soldier, more than a woman. She had become the embodiment of death itself, and the world around her would never look at her the same way again. Word of the canyon massacre spread faster than any courier could carry it. Survivors returned with trembling voices, speaking of how an entire strike team had been butchered in the dark by a single woman. They spoke of bodies stacked in the dust, of gunfire that never seemed to miss, of a hunter's leader gunned down with surgical precision. Every retelling grew taller, but the heart of the story was true. Lena had survived what should have been her death, and in doing so she had shattered the myth of rebel invincibility. Yet in the same breath, another myth was born, that Lena herself was something not quite human. When she returned to the forward base, soldiers parted like the sea before her. Men and women who had once laughed at her discipline or resented her iron control now lowered their eyes in silence. Some saluted with rigid formality, others simply moved out of her path as though her presence carried weight too heavy to bear. She felt it in the air, that mix of awe and fear, reverence and unease. They whispered when she passed, "The shadow of the canyon. Death's own hand. The one who cannot be killed." At first, Lena ignored it. Soldiers whispered about heroes in every war, names that grew larger than life until they were barely human at all. But this was different. It wasn't just the young recruits whispering her name, it was the commanders, the veterans, the politicians who began to wonder what it meant to have such a figure walking among them. She was useful, yes, but dangerous. A blade too sharp could cut the hand that wielded it. In meetings she felt their eyes linger. The brass spoke of containment, of redirecting her efforts, but the subtext was clear: they were afraid. Reports landed on desks in the capital, not only of her victories but of her mounting kill counts. 40 in the canyon. Dozens more in skirmishes before that. Numbers so high they blurred the line between soldier and executioner. Even allies wondered, how long before this woman stopped fighting for them and started fighting only for herself? Her own squad shifted too. They obeyed her without question, but the camaraderie was gone. Where once they had sat together around fires, trading quiet jokes or bitter complaints, now silence followed her everywhere. They ate in hushed tones, eyes flicking nervously to her as though waiting for her to reveal what she truly was. Karsten, who had once been the closest to her, could barely meet her gaze. When he did, his expression was carved from stone, masking the fear that had grown in him since that night. He had seen what she was capable of, seen how the hunters had fallen before her like wheat before a scythe. He respected her, yes, but respect had curdled into terror. Lena noticed it all, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that words changed little. Only deeds mattered. Still, in the privacy of her tent, when the silence pressed close, she felt the weight of it. Was she becoming the thing they whispered about? Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those she had killed, not with guilt, but with a strange detachment, as though the memory no longer belonged to her but to someone else entirely. She wondered if a part of her humanity had slipped away in that canyon, left bleeding out among the bodies. The commanders called her into strategy sessions more often now, not to ask her opinion but to observe her, to measure her responses. They assigned her missions far from the capital, always in the bloodiest sectors, as though keeping her on the edge of the war would keep her legend from growing too close to home. But it didn't work. Each battle she fought only added fuel to the fire. Reports came back not of squads or units winning, but of Lena herself cutting through the enemy lines, unstoppable, unshaken. Soldiers began painting her silhouette on their armor, whispering prayers in her name before going into combat. It unsettled the higher command. Armies were supposed to fight for banners, for causes, for leaders in suits and medals, not for one woman whose name had grown louder than theirs. There were hushed conversations of transferring her, of burying her in bureaucracy, even of quietly eliminating her before the myth grew too strong. No one said it openly, but Lena could read it in their eyes. She had become a weapon too powerful to control, and when weapons outlived their usefulness, they were broken. She felt it in the way her missions grew riskier, as if someone hoped the rebels would finish what the strike team could not. Entire squads were sent with her, then delayed in arriving, leaving her alone against overwhelming odds. Orders came that made little sense strategically but placed her squarely in the heart of slaughter. Yet each time she survived. Each time she came back bloodied but alive, dragging the victory with her like a grim trophy. And each time the whispers grew. Among the rebels, her legend twisted into nightmare. They painted her as a demon in human flesh, a specter who stalked their ranks, unkillable and merciless. Fighters deserted rather than face her. Camps burned themselves and fled at the mere rumor of her approach. She was winning battles without firing a shot, her reputation striking deeper than bullets ever could. But the effect on her own people was more complicated. Fear and worship blended until even her allies weren't sure whether to raise her as a savior or cast her out as a threat. One night, after another mission that should have killed her but hadn't, Karsten finally broke the silence. He stood outside her tent, his face hard, his voice low. "They're afraid of you, Lena," he said. "Not just the rebels. Our own people. The generals. Even me. He swallowed, the words scraping out of him like stone. You're not just fighting the war anymore. You're becoming it. She looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. The truth was there, laid bare between them. She had become something larger than herself, larger than the war even, and she knew there was no turning back. Whether she wanted it or not, her humanity was slipping away, replaced by the legend others built around her. She could not escape it. She could only decide what to do with it. As Karsten turned to leave, she spoke at last, her voice quiet but sharp as steel. Then let them fear me. And in that moment, Lena accepted the truth. She was no longer just a soldier. She was a symbol, and symbols were more dangerous than any army. The day of reckoning came not in the blaze of battle but in the silence of a council chamber. Lena was summoned back to the capital under the pretense of commendation, her name now echoing across the front lines and spilling even into neutral territories. Civilians spoke of her as if she were myth, children drew her silhouette on walls, enemy propaganda called her the Blood Widow. By every measure she was the most effective soldier the war had ever produced. Yet as she entered the towering halls of power, she could feel it in her bones. This was no honor they prepared for her. It was a judgment. The generals sat in a half-circle, their medals catching the pale light filtering through narrow windows. Politicians in tailored uniforms occupied the back rows, their faces taut with unease. No smiles greeted her. No congratulations. Only silence and the weight of their eyes. For a long moment no one spoke, as if waiting for her to bow, to submit, to prove she was still theirs to command. At last the senior general cleared his throat. His voice was measured, but Lena heard the fear under it. You've accomplished much. Too much. Armies no longer march in our name, they march in yours. Soldiers pray to you, not to the flag. Even the rebels know your shadow better than our banners. He paused, his gaze sharp. A war cannot be won by one woman. And if it could, it would no longer belong to us. It would belong to you. The words landed like a blade. Lena understood then what they intended. She was not being praised, she was being erased. Her victories had made her indispensable and intolerable. She was a weapon that had outgrown its masters, and in the minds of the powerful, there was only one fate for weapons too dangerous to wield: destruction. She felt Karsten stiffen behind her. He had insisted on accompanying her, though his face bore the same haunted strain as always. He must have known too. Perhaps he had known from the moment she agreed to return. Lena stepped forward, her boots echoing on the marble floor. So that's it, she said, her voice calm, almost detached. I fight your battles, bleed in your fields, bury your dead, and when I become what you asked me to be, you decide I am too much? The general did not flinch. We decide you are too dangerous. There it was, the truth spoken aloud. The room bristled with guards, their rifles angled discreetly but unmistakably toward her. Her hand twitched near her sidearm, but she did not draw. Not yet. She let the silence stretch, let them feel the weight of what they were about to unleash. Dangerous to whom? She asked finally. To the enemy, or to you? No one answered. They didn't need to. Something broke in her then, but it was not despair. It was clarity. She had spent years fighting for a cause that saw her as nothing more than a blade to be used and discarded. The soldiers feared her, the rebels cursed her, and now her own leaders marked her for death. If that was the truth, then there was no nation left for her to serve, only herself and the legend they had built around her. The guard stepped closer. Karsten moved instinctively to her side, his jaw clenched. She knew he feared her, but in that moment, fear gave way to loyalty, the kind born not of trust but of shared betrayal. Lena's voice cut through the chamber, low and steady. You want a symbol? You made one. And symbols don't die just because you will them too. The first guard raised his weapon. Lena moved before he could breathe. Her sidearm cleared its holster in a flash, a single shot ringing out like thunder in the confined space. The guard fell, his rifle clattering across the marble. Chaos erupted. Politicians scrambled for cover, generals shouted orders, and in the chaos Lena moved like the shadow they claimed she was, each motion precise, inevitable. By the time silence returned, half the guards lay sprawled, and the rest had fled in terror. Smoke curled in the air. Lena stood at the center of the chamber, her chest rising and falling steadily, her pistol still warm in her grip. The generals cowered, their authority shattered in the face of the very weapon they had sought to destroy. She did not kill them. Not yet. Death would make martyrs of them. Fear would make relics. Instead, she lowered her weapon and spoke words that would be repeated for years in hushed voices across both sides of the war. You tried to own me. You failed. You tried to bury me. You failed. From this day I fight for no flag, no banner, no general. I fight for the shadow you created, and shadows belong to no one. Then she turned, Karsten at her side, and walked out of the chamber. Not a single hand dared stop her. That night, Lena vanished from the capital. Rumors spread in every direction. Some said she had been seen on the front lines again, cutting through rebel columns with even greater ferocity. Others swore she had turned against the war entirely, targeting both sides like a phantom executioner. Still others claimed she was dead, her body hidden by the state, but the whispers of her return always followed, like ghost stories told around fires. Her legend only grew. Soldiers spoke of seeing her when battles turned desperate, a silhouette in the smoke, a flash of gunfire that tipped the scales. Rebels claimed their camps were haunted by her presence, her shadow stalking them through the night. Neither side could prove her existence, yet neither side could deny it. In time, Lena ceased to be a soldier at all. She became a myth, a force of nature whispered in the same breath as storms and plagues. Children born years later learned her name before they knew the names of leaders. And though none could say where she truly was, all agreed on one thing: the shadow of the canyon could never be killed. Lena herself walked unknown roads, her humanity a tattered cloak she wore in private moments. She was no longer sure if she was still a woman or merely the ghost they had made of her. But in the quiet, when the world fell still, she held to one truth: she had survived when survival was impossible, and in doing so she had become eternal. And so the war raged on, flags rising and falling, leaders living and dying, but above it all, in whispers and in shadows, one name endured: Lena. The soldier who could not die. The shadow that belonged to no one. The end.